Coming out of the trial, I was worth more dead than alive. It's time for my verdict. All dressed in dark suits, like men in black, trying to potentially intimidate the jury, right, or just stare down the jury.
Wow.
Like a show of force. They're the U.S. attorneys. Now is when you look at the jury. And I'm trying to make eye contact with all of them, and none of them will look at me, Angie. Not a single person.
Not even one.
Everything seemed overly aggressive and not built to find the truth, but built to destroy. He puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "Don't worry, there's always an appeal."
Right.
I spent millions of dollars. I had run out of money. I was in debt. There is no appeal. In the U.S. judicial system, if you don't have money, you have no chance. You have no chance. I'm not sure if I should go into the podcast, but I guess we can always edit it out. But you really know who your friends are when you go through something like this.
Good morning from Colombo, Sri Lanka, and welcome to the podcast. Rengan Rajaratnam, buried since 2014. Why now?
Angie, first, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Been, what, a year? I feel like things go in 10-year cycles, right? So I think 10 years seems to be a nice round number. The other thing is my mother unfortunately passed away about a year ago. And April 27th was her 1-year anniversary. And the Tamil Sangam in the United States had asked me to come give a speech and get some sort of award, right? And I was a little hesitant to do it because perhaps in the past it's been associated with things that I find not to my code of ethics. I'm a pacifist. I think we come from a region of nonviolence. So I wasn't sure if I should do it. But I looked at the date, it was April 27th, right? Exactly 1 year to the day that my mother passed. And my mother was a big believer. You know, she was a Sri Lankan first. She was very big into the Tamil community. So I felt as a way to honor her memory, I would go, give a speech. And I wanted to wait a year for after she passed to talk about anything, simply because, as you know, in our culture, even though unfortunately she was a bit of a vegetable for the last few years, I just didn't want it in the atmosphere, right? I didn't want it floating in the ether. Because if you ask me a direct question, I might choose not to answer it, but at least I have to have integrity with my answer. So somebody asks me about my trial or things at Galleon or whatever, I'm going to give you an honest answer. And maybe those answers weren't the answers my father and mother would have wanted to hear. It might have been the truth. And just out of respect, I just didn't want to say anything publicly until, a year after her death. Gave a speech, and I was hoping it'd be a speech about bridging gaps, right, between Sinhala and Tamil, because to me in America, it doesn't make any sense. I consider myself American first and then Sri Lankan second. To me, there is no difference between Tamil and Sinhala people. I have friends in both. I probably couldn't even tell the difference, quite honestly. And gave the speech, and I got a pretty good reception, especially among the younger generation, right? So people came up to me, "Can you coach me? Can you give me some advice?" And I thought, maybe we could do this on a bigger scale, right? Maybe we could do a podcast. I mean, the good thing about digital media is, if it sucks, you can just delete it. So I said, hey, give it a shot.
Wow. Amazing. You weren't convicted.
No.
You walked free.
Yeah.
But they still erased your name. So what was that erasure made of?
I mean, I wouldn't say they erased my name. Actually, quite the opposite. Unfortunately, my name got associated with insider trading. My brother, being Sri Lanka's first billionaire, right? So that had perhaps a positive connotation in the past. And then after his trial, and subsequently my trial, it had a bit of a negative connotation in the West. It's kind of interesting because in Sri Lanka, for some reason, my last name seems to be revered and opens doors, whereas in the United States, those doors get shut. Kind of curious dichotomy. But I wouldn't say it's erased. I would say it carries a lot of weight. So let's say you're raising capital, right? There are VCs and private equity firms and investment banks that may not want to associate with the Rajaratnam, even though I was found innocent. So unfortunately, I mean, you're essentially American, right? I mean,
Yes.
innocence until proved innocent, or right, innocent until proved guilty. But then there's the collateral effect that happens for years and maybe decades after. And so also part of this podcast was, I have a son, right? He's almost 4, but I wanted him to kind of get a story. Like, I'm an older parent, right? I'd like for him to get the story from my words, not for something he reads on the paper or something he reads in a book or, what happened, what went on, who his father is, who knows how much longer I'm around. So that was kind of the other reason to do it.
It's great thinking ahead. So you didn't write your narrative. Others did, but what did they get wrong?
Who specifically? Because there have been several books written around about Galleon. I think, without going too much into it, even though I was born in Sri Lanka, I became a U.S. citizen when I was, I think, 19, right? And so when you become a U.S. citizen, you enter into a compact. You remember the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah.
Right? So I take that stuff pretty seriously.
Yeah, definitely.
And America is the greatest country. Not taking anything away from Sri Lanka, but America is the greatest country in the world. It's afforded you and I and our parents so many opportunities. And so when you become a citizen of a country and you take that pledge, you have a compact to obey the rules and regulations of that country.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I have a big belief in the U.S. judicial system. There's some things I don't agree with, but I have a great faith in the American people and the American institutions. And so I think when you asked what did people get wrong, I think you can have 2 cases with 2 sets of facts and have different outcomes. And they're not mutually exclusive. Does that make sense? Right. So you can have one set of facts for my brother, and there might be one outcome, and you can have another set of facts with me and have, another outcome. The problem is that even after being found innocent, it was essentially a Pyrrhic victory. Like, I'm still paying the price for something that happened, I don't know, decade plus ago. And despite being found innocent, it still haunts me to this day. I mean, just everything as simple as Citibank, right? I can't open a Citibank card, right? They blocked me for whatever, even though my credit's perfect in the States. Traveling, every so often I get pulled over and, asked. But it's really tough in business, right? So let's say you want to, not that I want to go back into finance, but very unlikely that a U.S. investment bank, private equity firm, or venture capital would hire me despite my experience and track record, right? Simply because despite being found innocent. So that's,
Still lingering.
right? I mean, I think it's much better in Sri Lanka for whatever reason, right? It's nice, but it's still lingering.
Galleon, Sedna, insider trading, billion-dollar headlines. When did you realize, Rengan, that this wasn't about guilt, it was about optics?
I think the SEC, I think they may have been looking for guilt where maybe innocence was. And I'm not saying everyone was that way, right? I just think there was some collateral damage that happened in the wake of Operation Perfect Hedge, which was, I think, what Preet called it. But the question is, what was the outcome? Right? Have things really changed in Wall Street? Has behavior changed? Are people more compliant? And I'm not sure if much has changed. So the question is, did certain people that stood to gain from the publicity really garner all the value? Or did the public at large? Well, I'll give you an example, Angie. So in hedge funds or in investment banking, or if you're a hedge fund or mutual fund, there's these conferences, right? You go to a Goldman Sachs conference, you go to a UBS conference, and you get what's called a one-on-one, which is a meeting with either the CEO or CFO of XYZ company, right? It could be CFO of Microsoft or Apple or Google. And getting that access is incredibly hard, right? It's only relegated for the top, 0.1% of all funds. And when you get that access, you get to ask them questions, just like you and I are asking questions. And even if they're covered under Regulation FD, which is Regulation Fair Disclosure, meaning, Angie, that they have to give everyone the same information, you can pick up on tone, right? You can pick up on energy. If I talk like this, if I'm excited, if I'm talking about my products with enthusiasm, there's a certain body language you can pick up on that gives you a sense of, is the quarter going well or is it going poorly? Now, that hasn't changed. Pre-Galleon, post-Galleon. If I'm a fund that trades hundreds of millions of dollars of shares, worth of shares, and pays commissions to all the top names in the street, then I will get that access. If I'm Sedna, for example, right, when we launched with $7 million. I mean, we grew up to 100 plus million over time. Very hard for us to get access. Very hard for the retail individual to get access. So how is it that a retail investor will ever compete with a fund, billions of dollars under management, 100 plus analysts, access to management, access to the best models? I'm not saying that's fair or not fair, right? I'm just saying that's the way the system is. So it's like playing in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, you're a big football fan, right? Training, having the best physical therapists, the best masseuses, the best trainers, the best coaches, training off-season, on-season, and then, I want to go on the field and compete like there's no chance. So the markets are inherently unfair. The sooner people realize that, I think the happier they will be. And so has that changed? No. Can that ever change? I don't know. So.
Interesting. So what about Preet Bharara? You went up against him 85-0. Nobody beat him except you. What did the courtroom feel like that final week?
So, I really wanted to take the stand. My lawyers didn't want me to take the stand because they felt that I would, if the prosecution kept pushing and pushing and pushing, at some point I would lose my cool. I've since evolved, I think, with lots of meditation and therapy. So you're kind of sitting there all day and you're bored, right? You have to look interested. You can't doodle, right? You have to stay engaged, but it's hours and hours, and it's hours and hours of people saying really, really bad things about you, right? A lot of them untrue. And so you just can't react. So you sit there and you look at the jury. And so I just had little names for everyone, right? And there's one guy who was bald, like jacked, and he always used to wear these, Metallica fan? You know who they are, right? Iron Maiden, Metallica, amazing. So he'd wear these Iron Maiden. He just seemed like a cool guy you want to get a beer with. And so, and he was, I think, a security guard at Tappan Zee Bridge.
Okay.
And so I just call him, TZ, right? In my head. I was like, oh, what's up? So one day, I look over and I see TZ and he goes like this,
Oh, wow.
like, what's up? Right?
Like on a normal day.
On a normal day, like some guy, some FBI agent was just lambasting me. And I'm just like, oh my God. And I just look over and he goes like that. So I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? Right? I didn't want to be rude. Or I mean, this is a guy, could make or break my life. I'm looking at, 4.5 years
Wow.
inside if things don't go my way.
His one vote could be the game
It
changer.
could be a hung jury versus, yeah.
Right.
So I go like this, right? And one of the associates for the law firm saw it and told the partner, and he screamed at me the only, like my dad used to scream at me when I was so angry. He was like, do you know what you did? It could be viewed as jury tampering. And I was like, I don't know. He seemed like a cool guy. And he said, I didn't want to be rude. And he's like, really just got into my head, right? So he's like, just look straight. You're not supposed to talk to them, not supposed to interact. So then it's time for my verdict, right? My wife's there. All my friends were in the lunchroom. They're like, they've given the verdict, but they'd like to eat their lunch before telling you what it is.
Yeah.
You're finished deliberating. And so I'm sitting there I'm like, oh my God, like for a $7 lunch, like Jesus, like tell me. And so they come call me up, and my lawyer, who, Dan Gittner, is great. He became a friend, says, now is when you look at the jury. And you should look at them, and if they look at you back, you're fine. If they don't meet your gaze, you're screwed. I don't know why he said that. It was just completely unconstructive in the moment.
But it's very psychological as well, body language.
Right. So they all kind of, come in a line, and I'm trying to make eye contact with all of them, and none of them will look at me, Angie. Not a single person.
Not even one.
Not even one. And so I look over at Dan. He puts his hand on my shoulder and says, don't worry, there's always an appeal. And for people who are not familiar with the U.S. judicial system, appeals never that's not comforting.
Right.
I spent millions of dollars. I had run out of money. Right. I was in debt. There is no appeal. So I look over and Tappansy's like this. Gave me like a nut. I've always been meaning. I know I say this every year. I'm like, I got to find this guy. I have to track him down and take him out for a drink. And then I was like, oh, I just knew. Right. And then they said it's not, he's not guilty. My wife was super excited. Everyone was cheering.
Oh.
But here's the interesting thing. You asked about Preet Bharara. So, just unnecessary, right? So during jury deliberations, he had 12 AUSAs, which are they're the U.S. attorneys, all dressed in dark suits with, like Men in Black, right? And they all were just on the periphery of the courtroom.
Wow.
Trying to potentially intimidate the jury, right? Or just stare down the jury.
Wow.
Like a show of force. And I remember reading, I think it was in a Wall Street Journal article or someplace else, that it actually backfired. The jury's like, what are they trying to prove?
Yeah.
So, I don't know Preet personally, right? I've heard stories. This podcast is not really to slam anyone, but it just everything seemed overly aggressive and not built to find the truth, but built to destroy. So when Tappansy gave me the nod, and then the jury found me not guilty, which was amazing. Yeah. The wave of euphoria. It occurred to me that the only reason not the only reason, but one of the reasons I was found innocent was because I had an amazing legal team. And I'd spent several $1 million, right? Like literally everything I had. Unfortunately, Galleon never reimbursed those legal fees, right? Even though it's indemnified, which means legally they're obligated to. So that's, that was very unfortunate. But I was like, in the U.S. judicial system, if you don't have money, you have no chance. You have no chance. Statistically, prosecutions win 99+% of the time. Lawyers charge $400 or $500 an hour. If you're lucky, you got no chance.
But what about like a good public defender?
Yeah, I mean, even then, there's a lot of pressure to plead, right? Because the risk-reward system is so messed up that if you go to trial and lose, it's much, much, much worse than if you plead out and there's sentencing guidelines and there's a point system for accepting sort of responsibility. I mean, it's a very complicated system. I think there needs to be a lot of reform in our judicial system in the United States, but that's a whole other topic. It's geared to be punitive as opposed to help with rehabilitation. It's a very puritanical, Quaker-based kind of system, which I just don't agree with. So when I was found innocent, it did occur to me that part of the reason was because I had money. And I promised myself that I was going to do something to help. And so I started reviewing cases for the Innocence Project, the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, which what covers D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, which is where I live. And finally, they invited me to be on the board. So I was a CFO, I was a treasurer, I was on the executive committee, and we freed 40, 50 people that were wrongfully accused, a lot of them on death row.
Wow.
And Angie, it's crazy. Like, I met these men who had been on death row for 10, 15, 20 years for something they didn't do that was irrefutable with DNA evidence. And they were some of the happiest, most centered people I'd ever met.
Wow.
So anyway, it was an interesting experience, but I do wonder whether systems like Norway and Sweden, where there's a big push on reintegrating people into society, could be systems that the United States and other countries emulate.
Wow. But that was amazing to hear that you were able to clear those names before they got the ultimate,
Like the death penalty?
Yeah, I mean,
I think we only had 1 or 2 death row cases, but the whole death row thing is another crazy concept. Right?
One of my pet peeves is when someone gets wrongfully accused of something. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. So to hear that was amazing. So
yeah,
I don't know, later let's talk more about that and the stories behind it. Yeah. Oh, wow. So during the trial, were there any moments that you didn't want anyone to see, hidden moments, things that are just kind of there in the background, anything that you didn't want to come forward?
I mean, it's incredibly stressful, right? Every day is it's a grind. And because I know it sounds like millions are a lot, but for this kind of case, there wasn't a lot of money. So my lawyers literally put me into a converted closet and I just had to grind all day, right? I got to work at 5:36. I went through case files. I went through records. I went through tape recordings. It was incredibly, incredibly intense. But just like in business, right? Just like in order to be successful, the only way is to grind, right? You cannot let somebody else take control of your destiny. You cannot let the lawyers dictate your story. I cannot let my engineers control my product, right? I have to be the first person in, and I have to be the last person to leave. If I'm not willing to make that sacrifice, then I should plead out. If I'm not willing to make that sacrifice as an entrepreneur, I should shut down my company because we're on a global field, right? Let's just switch gears for business, right? I'm trying to build this product in Sri Lanka, right? There's so much amazing talent here. Country of 22 million people, right? Some of them brilliant, but it's that lack of consistency and discipline that prevents this country from going into its power and its greatness. I don't know if you know this, but Lee Kuan Yew came to Sri Lanka in the 70s, right? Have you read his book, From Second World to First?
Well, I watched his interview. I know
It's,
exactly.
it's amazing, right? He built Singapore based on the principles in Sri Lanka. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why is Singapore so advanced, has a society where Tamil, Malay, Chinese, British coexist peacefully, right? You go on the subways, stop is in Tamil, stop is in, it's all these languages. And we have just, we've progressed, but not at that rate. And I think there are a lot of reasons. I think a 30-year war, that doesn't make any sense, that sucked up a lot of beautiful babies and children and these beautiful lives. But the resources, right, that were consumed, and then the psychological impact that it has on the people. I mean, I think you can sense it, right? I mean, even now,
Yeah.
right? It's what, been 15 years since the war ended, but you can still feel it, right? There's this sense of anxiety that I think there's generational trauma that people carry within them,
Generational trauma.
which I hope with, the continued prosperity and hopefully the new government will be eradicated. And then Sri Lanka, like other countries, can leverage this amazing and talented workforce, which, the literacy rate in Sri Lanka is 95% plus. I mean, I was having a conversation with the Uber driver in English about these amazing topics. He spoke English better than most people I've run into in certain places in Miami,
Wow.
for example.
No, even tuk-tuk drivers.
It's just,
I mean,
it's crazy.
you can converse with them. And when you go to countries like Malaysia,
Right,
you
you
can't
can't.
even
You
ask for
can't.
like, where can I
Right.
change money?
Right.
And when you try to act it out, even there's just no way of getting your message across. But here in Sri Lanka, a tuk-tuk driver can
It's-
guide you.
it's amazing. And
I mean,
this
no
is-
offense against tuk-tuk
No,
drivers.
no, no.
you know
But
what I
listen,
mean.
it's and they speak 3 languages, right? It's
Yeah.
not just, so it's like they speak Sinhala, they speak English, they might speak Tamil,
Yeah.
and they're able to communicate effectively. It's just, I don't know. From that perspective, Sri Lanka, as you know, right, is a very special place.
So Rengan, the case ends. Camera's gone. You disappear. What did isolation do to your identity?
Well, despite having won, it's the euphoria quickly wears off, and then you got to get to work. So the issue was, I'd spent all this money on legal fees. I had applied for my indemnification, meaning that it should have gotten paid back. For whatever reason, it was not. No need to talk about why, but they didn't do the right thing. And so that money never came back. My lawyers, despite being paid a lot of money, felt like they were owed more. And they didn't want to take on the case if I didn't have the funds, and Galleon refused to release those funds to me. Even though I was the only person who was ever found innocent, and I was the only person at Galleon whose legal fees were not covered. So that was very disappointing. So coming out of the trial, I was worth more dead than alive, right? I was in debt. I owed a bunch of money to my lawyers and some other providers, like jury consultants, whomever. And I just had to get to work. And it was very, very difficult because a lot of the people who I helped throughout my career, I've always tried to help people, reach out, add value where I can, shut the doors. You really know who your friends are when you go through something like this.
Oh, definitely.
So, I went to Stanford Business School, I went to Penn, I have a lot of friends who are very successful. When things were good, right, when they needed my help, when they wanted access to some of the toys that comes with being a hedge fund manager, they're your best friend. When you have a blight on your name, they don't want to associate with you. And also, Angie, like, what you don't want to do is you don't want to reach out to people, because you also don't want to impose, right? You don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. I went through a trial. I had heart failure and almost died because of the stress. Before that, you weren't there, and now you're calling them. It just so what I did is I took took time either purposely or by necessity, right, to really focus on what I wanted to do and deal with, some of the personal demons that we all suffer from, right? Just, growing up in Sri Lanka, being in a culture where corporal punishment is a big part of it, living in a culture where, women aren't treated with respect, right? My father just was never respectful to my mom. So I just kind of had to clean up some of those issues. But, I will tell you this. So I'm not sure if I should go into the podcast, but I guess we can always edit it out.